I'm going to begin this video by making the legs. And the first thing that I want to do is to manipulate the grain into a rift-sawn orientation. That ensures that I'll have straight grain on all sides. I accomplish that by using a negative template that is the dimension of my leg. From there, I'll look at the growth rings on the end, and I just try to kind of maneuver this negative template around until I get one growth ring going from one corner to the other corner, and then tracing that shape out with my pencil. I'm going to use a table saw to cut this out, so what I need to do is angle the blade to match the weird angle that I just drawn on the workpiece. So I just kind of eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect, you know. I try to stay off the line a little bit so that I can come back and mill it down to final dimension. So I made this template for a previous build. I really like the shape of it, but it's a little bit too big for the legs that I need to make for this project. So I just kind of altered it a little bit and moved it around just to make it fit. With that template drawn onto my leg blank, I can go ahead and head to my bandsaw and cut that out. I'm running a pretty wide bandsaw blade right now, and I didn't really feel like changing it out, so to get into the tight curves, I just make a bunch of little, cuts, and that allows me to get a slightly wider blade that's not really meant for tight radiuses into that radius. And with that done, I can head to my router and pattern it out on this jig that I've made. It's not a dedicated jig for this project. It was for something else, but it's got the same curves that I like, and I can just move the leg around a bit and make it work. I need to join another piece of wood onto this whole base assembly, and to do that I'm going to use slip tendons. I've made this horizontal mortiser that I was inspired to build after I saw Philip Morley, another woodworker, had made for his shop. It works pretty well. It's really accurate, and it allows me to do some relatively complicated joinery procedures effectively. You'll probably notice that I've got a lot of blue tape on my workpieces. These are giving me reference faces, and when doing mortising, reference faces are really easy ways to make sure that you're registering your workpiece off of the same face. It's important just because when you go to glue up or starting to assemble your furniture, all of your workpieces, if they're registered off the same face when you're mortising, they're all going to line up perfectly. To make the tendons, I'll run some stock the same dimension of the mortise I just made, ensuring that it's the same species of wood that I'm gluing it into. So white oak tendons into white oak legs, and then cut the stock to dimension of the mortise and use a round over bit to round over those corners. And you can see right there the blue tape. So blue tape matches blue tape. I did all the mortising with blue tape up, and because of that, the components join together really well. After the glue's dried, I'm just going to put on a 1/4 inch round over just to soften up the legs a bit and lighten them up a bit and make them seem a little softer. Now I'm going to get started on the back frame and panel. I'm going to go over to my woodpile and grab a piece of white oak to start on the frame. By using the bandsaw to rip this piece of wood, I was able to get all 4 parts of my frame. I'm fitting the back frame and panel into the rabbet in the bookcase, and to get an accurate dimension for this, I use a story stick. Basically what I'll do is get a thin strip of wood and put 2 sharp points on each end. I'll gradually take my chisel and chisel it, little by little off until that strip fits perfectly into that space, and then that will be my dimension for which I, cut my frames at. I like this technique just because it's accurate. You have the story stick that already fits into that space that you need. Why would you use a tape measure? Because sometimes, the tape measure has thick ticks and there's room for error. So story stick that fits perfectly in the space, you're good to go. And just like with the legs, the frame gets slip tendons. The last process involved is just to run a groove that will accept the Doug-fir boards. And then you'll notice the blue tape again as a reference face. So instead of trying to center that router bit on my workpieces, I just get close to center and then make sure I run each piece with the blue tape facing out, and then they will all line up. With the frame pretty much done, I can shift my focus now to making the Doug-fir tongue and groove boards. I've been looking forward to getting into this stock for a long time, and the time is now. I'll start just by milling it down. So I'm going to cut it in a rough dimension, and then from there, I'm going to head over to my joiner, flatten surfaces, head to my planer, flatten the other side, you know the drill. And my shop helper decided to stop in for the day. I use a dado stack to mill all the tongue and groove boards, so what I'm doing now is just running all the grooves, and then I'll adjust my setup to actually start running all the tongues. I'll figure out my setup and then just run everything at that dimension and hope that it works. And now I'm getting close to putting this all together, so I'm going to take my hand plane, my joiner plane, and just kind of clean up any bandsaw surfaces, and then round some edges over, and just prep for glue up. At this point, I'm only going to glue up one side of the frame, but I'm going to put it all together as it's being glued up, just to get everything square. I'm doing that so that I can still put in the tongue and groove boards. So I'll glue it up and then remove one side and then slide all those boards in, and then glue up the last piece. Some math was involved when I laid this all out. I didn't really worry about it too much. I figured if I have to, cut a board down slightly to make it fit, that wouldn't be a big deal, but it ended up actually working out pretty well, so that was satisfying. You'll notice that I'm only gluing the tenons in this whole glue up. That's because these Doug fir boards actually float inside of this frame. That allows for seasonal wood movement. So in the summer, they're going to get a little bit wider. They're going to soak up some moisture and get bigger. And then during the winter, they're going to shrink down a bit due to being a little bit drier. So that just allows the boards the freedom to move around and won't blow your work apart. After glue up, I'll just flush up any discrepancies in the frame. I'm using my low angle block plane by Lee Nielsen. It's a pretty great tool to actually plane end grain. Now I'll get started on actually fitting the whole back panel construction into the case. I'm going to try and establish a bevel with my hand plane to allow the back panel to fit a little bit more snugly and easier into that rabbet. I was having a little bit of trouble getting my joiner plane to plane out the center of this frame because it wasn't glued, so it was kind of springing down a bit. I ended up having to take my block plane and getting to the center of the frame component just to get a consistent dimension. This was probably the most satisfying part of this whole project was, getting this pretty large back panel to fit really nicely and snug into this opening. And now I'll just apply some glue into the rabbet and put the back panel in for good. The final process in this video was to attach the legs. I'm using machine screws that will be threaded into threaded inserts that I put into the bottom of the bookcase. To find the location of the threaded inserts, I'll temporarily mount the legs to the case using double stick tape and then just use a center punch in the holes that I had just made. The simplest way that I found to install these threaded inserts is just to use a machine screw and then 2 nuts that are kind of tight against each other, and that allows you to screw in the threaded insert easier. A lot of them are slotted, and it would make sense to use like a flathead screwdriver to drive them in, but sometimes they're made of brass and then they'll break. So yeah, just 2 nuts on a machine screw, and then you'll be able to screw it in pretty easily. Alright, and that should do it for this video. In the next video, we're going to tackle the crates. So, thanks for watching, I appreciate it.